Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 98th episode of Retuning Your Firm. We're going to be 100 in January. That's amazing, isn't it? It's Friday, the 25th of October, and it's a very grey day today where I'm at home, but hopefully it's nicer with you. So what are today's themes? Well, I think we'll be touching on growth. You may have read that the industrial strategy came out recently, and that was all about growth. Innovation, because innovation is what sustains growth in many ways. And again, picking up industrial strategy, the actual strategy itself. So this is me, and I'm really pleased to be your co-host for today. So I'd just like to introduce you to your fellow panelists for today, and I will start off with my co-host. Welcome to Matt. This is Matt Meadows, and Matt is the CEO of an accountancy firm, but actually slightly more than that, an alternative business structure firm, Moore Kingston Smith, and he's the managing partner there, and he will be co-hosting the show with me and shortly introducing our first presenter, John Rowland, the regular political slot. So welcome to you today, Matt. I'll now, if I may, move to John, and John Rowland is the UK consulting lead at consultancy H advisor Cicero, and he is somebody who has a disability which I always find I'm very jealous of being able to say something and then you look at the transcript and it's word perfect. I ramble too much, I know that, but John is absolutely spot on. So I'm really looking forward to what you have to say, obviously with the budget and the US elections all within very close distance. And when we meet in a month's time, and John is a regular, we will hopefully know the result of both those things, though the budget may take a little bit longer to work out the real implications. And then our panelists for today, I would like to introduce Rachel Holmes. Rachel's been on the show before, some time ago. She is the chief executive at Matrix Chambers, which is obviously a leading barristers chambers. She says she's about to go for a long weekend in Portugal, so the taxi is waiting at 9:45. So can we please stop on time? Rachel, you're incredibly welcome, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend as well. So back to me, right. Before we start with hearing what John is going to tell us, which is going to be incredibly interesting as usual, a little bit of forum news. I mentioned very briefly then that professional services has been designated as one of the 8 this new adjective, growth-driving. I think they had to do something that was different from Theresa May, sectors in the government's modern industrial strategy. Now, I think that the important point to me was, and if you look at the green paper that came out, the approach they're suggesting that they will be placing private business, entrepreneurship and innovation at the heart of their strategy, supported by government playing a strategic and coordinating role. Now, those words can be interpreted all sorts of ways, but hopefully they will at least give private enterprise and business the opportunity to be in a more of a driving seat than was possibly the case. One of the things that's different about this particular version of the industrial strategy compared with, say, Theresa May version, which is more about you go away, oh sectors, and come back with your plans, and then we will bless them or not, is that on this occasion, government has actually done some homework and has identified 8 subsectors that meet its objectives and where it's evidence that they believe that policy can address barriers to growth. But they're going to do it at the subsector level. In other words, they're not going to take professional services as a whole, but they're actually look at some of the subsectors. And our contention as the Managing Partners Forum is that professional services mid-market is a suitable subsector, and it could make an important contribution to some government's key objectives around net zero, regional growth, economic security, and resilience, because after all, we are the largest sector, and we have this mighty mid-market, two of whom are represented today with their CEOs. So what are the barriers to growth? The lack of knowledge on how to grow a business, because many managing partners find themselves thrust into that role without a huge amount of training and management skills, and poor absorption and diffusion of ideas. And there's 2 issues there. One is we're incredibly successful, so people tend not to listen if they're making a load of money. As Richard Susskind said, it's hard to tell a room of millionaires to do something differently. And then partly because we kind of like places we know. So ideas coming from new places are a bit scary. And if they're written in what I call academic dense, then they definitely are turn off. So what we will look to do is to see if we can help there, actually providing summaries of some of those great research studies and also bringing together managing partners for events with awards and surveys and all that sort of stuff. So that's a little bit about the industrial strategy and where the forum sits. Last couple of days ago, I was at the launch of the IOD Code of Conduct for Directors. May sound as if it's not relevant to professional services. Absolutely brilliant. I would recommend it to anybody. And I think it's highly relevant to really anyone in our sector in a leadership role. So we will be, I've already told John at the IOD, who's on our advisory board, as you know, that we will definitely support it. And he was very pleased to hear that. What we're doing, we're launching a new salary comparison service for really for the HR team to kind of work out what are the practice management salaries that are there based on actual, you contribute and then you can see kind of that thing. And then finally, expect to receive an invite for the Retuning online community later today. Okay, that's more than enough from me. So what I'm going to do now, if I may, is invite Matt, just pass you over, to introduce John. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Richard. And it's great to hear that our sector has been recognised. You know, the UK has got an excellent reputation for professional services, big exporter of the knowledge as well. So it's great that government are recognising that. So I'm pleased to introduce, as Richard said, a regular to these podcasts, John Rowland, strategic communications consultant and UK consulting lead at H Advisors Cicero. I did a bit of research on him and I found some rather embarrassing quotes. He's been described as an inspirational leader and with one of the most powerful visions for the future of public affairs I have seen. And that was from his boss, apparently. So praise indeed. On the back of that, over to you, John.
Thank you, Matt, for that much needed Friday morning ego boost. Obviously, a delight to be back to talk to you again. And as Richard says, every 4 weeks, I have to remind myself what I said last time. And I think last time I started by saying that the government had a bit of a rocky start, was a bit unsure, was clearly learning on the job. And then within a few days, Keir Starmer had actually turned his top team upside down. Sue Gray left Downing Street, and the Prime Minister installed a new Chief of Staff in Morgan McSweeney. So that operation, that's a refresh, has only barely been in place for a few weeks. And the question at that point was, well, look, is it really the staff? Is it the Downing Street operation that's the problem, or is there a deeper issue with the leadership of the Prime Minister? And we'd be able to take a view on that. Well, I will say, in defence of the government over the last few weeks, the message has been slightly more deft, a little bit less accident prone. And from what we hear about the workings of government, there are a lot of things that had been blocked or stopped that are beginning to move. So it seems as if this may be a situation where part of the issue was personnel. But as I say, it's only been a few weeks. I mean, Sue Gray was a career civil servant, came from that background, whereas Morgan McSweeney, the new Chief of Staff, is very much a political operative, more tuned into what's the public saying, what's the message, and what's the presentation of the government externally. So you would hope and expect for the government to have a better grip on its external message. All right, so I'm obsessed by that stuff because I work in political communications. But what about the substance? Well, it's also been busy on the on the issue of substance as well. The government hosted its investment summit a couple of weeks ago, where it invited in lots of large companies, institutional investors together to make the case for investment in the UK. I think the main thing that I take from that summit was there was quite a lot of disquiet about the alleged poor organisation of that. That it was going to be a damp squid, but in the end, I think the government did a pretty good job. Most people felt that it was a worthwhile summit. I think the message for this group that I take from this is something that Keir Starmer said, which is to put more pressure on the regulators to follow a pro-growth agenda. Now, at the end of the last Tory government, this was beginning to go up the agenda as that they, for example, introduced in the Financial Services Bill a secondary duty on the Financial Conduct Authority to promote growth. And that was because there was this sense that regulators were just being too safe. They were, we'd have the stability of the graveyard, that regulators were too interested in preventing corporate failure of any form, and therefore that was kind of damping down risk taking. So Starmer made some quite interesting comments on that, and I think this is particularly pointed at the CMA. You need to be thinking about what you're doing to promote growth, as well as regulate markets for safety and security. The other thing that's happened, and I'll get onto the budget in a moment, is we've seen the Employment Rights Bill, which was a promise for the first 100 days. This is the Angela Rayner package of enhanced workers' rights. So within that, there's all sorts of stuff, but it's about day one employment rights. The regulation of 0-hour contracts is in there. There will be more to protect the ability for trade unions to organize. So that's coming down the line as well. One thing that I think I was critical of and hasn't appeared is the stuff to the right, the right to switch off stuff. That can has been kicked down the road, and at the time I said I think that is a worry for people in professional services, that you start to regulate the way in which people like me can deliver our services. And I for somebody who works with people across the world, like, having a right to switch off doesn't really fit into the way my business works. So I'm personally pleased to see that go, but I don't or to be deprioritized, but I don't think it's gone completely yet. Okay, budget, and then I'll talk about the US election. We were just talking on the pre-call. Budget day is nearly upon us. We will all be put out of our misery soon enough. The speculation has been endless. What is likely is that taxes will fall on things and assets primarily. It will be CGT. It will be IHT that I think will be where the taxes fall. The government has already more or less committed to it has committed to no increases in income tax, but there's constant rumours about NICs being put on employer pensions contributions, so there will almost certainly be increased costs on employers. The thing that's slightly sneaky, and the last government got the benefit of this as well, is nobody's increasing income tax rates, but fiscal drag has pulled loads more money into the exchequer because the existing bands have not been raised with inflation. So more and more people are being pulled into the 40% band in particular. So the government will certainly benefit from that. The thing that I said would be really impactful and to look out for, perhaps more impactful than anything else announced in the budget, is what Rachel Reeves would do with the fiscal rules to allow more borrowing. And in Washington yesterday, she announced just that they are going to revise how the government's balance sheet is used in calculations of public debt. So what that will do, by counting more assets on the government balance sheet, will allow a more headroom for her to borrow in order to fund investment. Now, it's all very well having the rules that allow you to do it, but you also need to issue the debt to the markets, to the gilt markets, to pay for it, to fund it. And what we have seen over the last few weeks is a creeping up of UK gilt rates. So the government's debt issuance is getting more expensive, and that's broadly because the market is concerned that the government will borrow more. So there's two things going on. Institutional investors, particularly big pension funds, are saying, look, it's good. We want the government to borrow more if it funds productive investment, but nevertheless, there's still this residual nervousness, which I think follows on from the sort of calamitous mini budget about the fiscal sustainability of the UK. So that's why you're going to have this sort of duality of borrowing more to increase investment, but actually potentially quite a hard spending settlement for public services in a bid to show the markets that the government is not spending more money than it can afford to. Finally, on the US election, it's a coin toss. That's the line that my colleagues in the United States are using. I think all the polling indicates it could go either way on the presidential election. The polling gaps are small, and particularly in the swing states, which will determine this, very narrow indeed. The Senate is in play, so there's a reasonable chance that the Senate could switch to the Republican Party. Control of the Senate will switch to the Republican Party. And my understanding from my US colleagues is the House could go either way. So the permutations of outcomes in this election are quite wide. It is not inconceivable that you could have Donald Trump in the White House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House, or you could have a Democratic president with divided government, with a, for example, a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. So we don't know, and none of my colleagues are putting any money on it. They just will not be drawn on what the outcome could be. So I will leave it at that, if that's okay, Matt and Richard.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you very much, John. And I'm sure we'll pick up some of those points, but also we'll talk to you wearing your leadership hat within your own firm, because obviously, as an important consultancy firm, you're as much a part of professional services as any law or accountancy firm. Right, I'm going to now switch to give a presentation, hopefully relevant and interesting, of the findings from the tracker that we conducted, well, literally in the last few weeks. Now, for those who are not familiar with the tracker, it's something that we have carried out quarterly for, well, about 12 years, actually, so it's quite well established. 90 members, it's in a formal research panel, and 95% of the 90 members completed it over the last month. What do governments say about it? Governments say a lot of the points raised in forum trackers are similar to those we hear from other PBS firms around skills, use of tech, etc. It is thus useful to see the tracker as validating those themes. So let's just pick up a few points here. First one is that professional services is critical to exports. Now, that's possibly one of the reasons we were included in the industrial strategy. And if you look at this particular chart, you'll see that for the people who are more than 20% of their services based on invoice value, that's actually more than a quarter of the firms. And there's another 19% between 10 and so that's, I think, says a little bit about the sector that possibly wasn't known before. Or whenever you got the ONS to look at the data, they'll always say, "Oh, it's other services or something." But if you actually analyze it, it's really professional services. The second element, which is new in this tracker, which we haven't really asked before, is about management style, and in particular, contrasting challenge and support. Which is essentially, I'm going to give you a really tough job, but I'm going to support you to get there, with command and control, which sort of needs no introduction. And what's interesting here, if you look at the stats, is that 70% of the tracker firms say that their firm has a challenge and support approach, 5% for command and control. I suspect that if you actually went to talk to their clients, you might find it the other way around. And there's lots and lots of academic evidence that if you really do want to achieve a lot in your business, challenge and support is a much more effective way of achieving that. Okay, so what does that then involve in practice, the challenge and support? Well, the two themes that come out very strongly in terms of the management initiatives that people consider will help them meet their firms achieve its goals are effective communication and getting the best from the team. And they're actually tied. Last quarter, you can see the purple one went up a little bit. That's the team. But in reality, those two are the ones that people say are the most important part of a challenge and support environment. So let's look at confidence for a minute, and you'll see from this chart that it's kind of continuing to rise. This is the net expansion and contraction and projected levels of activity. So what we're doing here is we're taking the total number of people, firms who say they are projecting an increase in levels of activity, which is 88% in this quarter, and those who are projecting a decline or a contraction, which is 2%. So your net is 86%. And that is not as high as it's ever been, looking back at over a few years back into sort of 2021, but it's certainly up there. So that confidence is continuing to rise. Not quite the same for headcount. I know this is obviously going to be a political issue, but I'm not saying it's a jobless recovery either. But headcount growth, which is at about 65%, is not 88%. In other words, whilst very few are seeing a contraction, 5%, most are it's going to stay about the same. So that again, I think is quite interesting. What are the things that are getting in the way of growth? Well, we've got the usual two, which are fee pressures and margin erosion. And what's interesting is that actually both of those have increased in terms of priority over the past, since the last time we did this tracker. So they're becoming more acute issues for driving firms. So what's the priority? Again, very much as for the last few quarters, about 4 quarters now, operational efficiency, the blue, has just stood out there dramatically. So that kind of gives you some sense as to what's going on. But what happens with the clients? And one of the things that we like to track is the perception as the extent to which your firm is on track for success and the extent to which your key clients are on track for success. Now, if you go back into the pandemic, and those data goes back for a couple of years now, back to 21, 22, you'll see that gap was really quite large. There was one blip when it went down to 0 in September 22, but I suspect that was a strange month. I don't remember much about that one. But actually what you're seeing here now is the two are very much converging. In other words, we're okay, but our clients are okay too. And that's really important, because at the end of the day, the only place I'm aware of where you actually get money from is clients. If you borrow it from a bank or an funder, sadly, you've got to give it back. Remote working patterns, they've settled down. I mean, you can kind of see that the one in the middle around half of the time, that sort of olive one, is there, and then the one immediately below that around a quarter of the time. So they're in the sort of high 80s. A few people at the top spending none of the time, and a few people all of the time. But they're very few and far between. That's the remote patterns are settling. But what it has had as a limited effect is the limited impact on productivity. And I'd like to thank Rachel, by the way, for this question, because she's the one who said it'd be nice to know if it's decreased productivity, and it did. So yes, but equally 24% said it's increased productivity, 19% it's decreased, which leaves 57 in the middle, which to me says, yes, we've got new ways of working, but they're not really having much impact on productivity. So I'm afraid that's not going to be a sort of a way for government to see its growth. In the last tracker, not this one, but 3 months ago, we looked a bit more depth into some of the key themes that were important to firms, and the ones that came out, again, I'm not sure if you can see the heading, but innovation and training, innovation to the right, 38%, training to the left, 36%, and then you had AI and sustainability, who was smaller, and this was binary. They had to choose one. So innovation and training are the two things that are very, very important. What we also then saw was that, and again, I won't go through the detail, but if I just say the blue one is we're doing it now, and then the purple one means we're not doing it at all. Very few people, the highest blue is 70%, then it's 20%, 40%, 40%. So in other words, what we're saying, really best practice is not being fully implemented for any theme. And yet, there's always a yet in life, isn't there? Most rate their firm ahead of its peers. Do you think your firm is taking a market-leading approach to developing and deploying these themes? And if 0 is significantly behind peers and 10 is significantly ahead, the average there is about 6.3. So we're doing okay, and yet they haven't really got the infrastructure to support many of those themes. Otherwise, those practices would be in place. So let's recap. What have I said today? That professional services is critical to exports, and it's key to the government's industrial strategy. I suspect our huge important contribution to exports was one of the reasons why we were included as one of those 8 growth driving sectors. That challenge and support is the most common management style, and I think that's true pretty much across the sector. We can talk about that possibly in a minute. And what does that mean in practice? It means you focus on effective communication and getting the best from the team. That confidence continues to rise. It can't go above 100, because 88 is pretty close. But with headcount not expected to expand as fast as activity levels. That fee pressures are increasing and margins are eroding. That's coming through quite strongly. Yet, and I think if we pick up some of John's insights on the budget, those margins will be under yet more pressure with extra costs coming into the business. Operational efficiency remains the top priority. And I'm an accountant, and I know that marginal costing means if you start at the tail of the dog, you end up at the nose eventually. So pure focus on efficiency doesn't actually get you where you might want to get to. And the perceived on track with key clients is narrowing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, but these are things which really matter. Remote working patterns have settled, but with a limited impact on productivity. Innovation and training are seen as the most important themes, yet best practice is not fully implemented for any theme. and most rate their firms ahead of its peers. So my very simple question, and we may kick off the panel session with this, is how realistic is this assessment by firms of their peers? So perhaps I may invite Rachel to join us and
Yes. Thanks, Richard. I mean, I have to say all of that speaks very largely to my experience of running a mid-sized firm. I think your tracker is really paralleling what I experience. And I just can I just pick on one of the points, because you did suggest that I'd raised a question about the hybrid working and that sort of new model that we've got since COVID, and whether or not it raises or decreases productivity. And I've really struggled with monitoring this myself. I haven't seen a dip in productivity at all, but I think we were working really well before we did this, and I don't think that's altered. I don't think we're working any better because of it. But my point that I'd like to sort of raise here for those of us who are sort of leading firms is that it might not be necessarily overall increasing productivity within the firm, but it's absolutely increasing people's well-being and their balance in their life. And that I think it's important for us to measure that as well, because I'm having quite a few conversations now with some people who are perhaps a little tired of not seeing people physically always in the firm. And my point is, well, just pick up the telephone. But we're in a strange world now where people don't pick up the telephone to each other quite like they did when I was starting out, perhaps. But I'm really, really keen, and I'd be interested, Matt, how it works for you. I'm really keen in trying to maintain this balance with hybrid working, because I see the benefits on a personal level to so many people in the firm. And I understand why some people like to see people in the flesh when they come into the building. But I really, really want to maintain this well-being across the organisation. So I don't know, Matt, if that chimes with you at all.
Absolutely, yes. I think in our firm, it's found the right balance over time. Okay, generally speaking, of course, there'll be outliers here and there, but really important for well-being. It's important for people to have the choice about where they work as well, which really helps the flexibility there. Challenges for us in terms of providing that agile workspace, knowing how much capacity that we actually need, particularly when it varies from day to day across the week. But it is so much better than it was pre-COVID in terms of people's flexibility. And I think the key thing for us is trust breeds trust. Okay, so that there was, the old culture in professional services firms was, if they're not at their desk, they're not working. Okay, yeah. That's completely out of the window now. Yeah. And there's an element of trust that's been built up there now that people can be productive. They can be really quite engaging and useful when they're at home, and that trust reflects back on the firm as well, which has been really good. I think there's still more work to be done. Our biggest challenges are around training. I think that's the theme that's come up before, and we give guidance, right, really. So for our trainees that are still learning their profession, we say, look, you need to be with people at least 3 days a week. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, you might be here in the office with a team. You might be at the client's premises, on an audit or whatever, but with a team, so you're learning from other people. But I think it's positive at the moment for us.
Yeah, I think that thing about training is really key as well, and I think where it's where this hybrid working, remote working has gone wrong at times is when it's been taken too literally, and it's felt that anyone can do that whenever they should wish to. And there's certain contexts in which it just doesn't work so well. And so if you're new in the job, or you're learning your craft, or in our case, if you're a trainee barrister and you're on your pupillage year, you need to be in. You need to be around the experts and learning. And so I think it's about having, as you say, trusting that everyone's doing the right thing for what the role requires, but not throwing baby out the bathwater and saying this thing isn't working. And I think that's where I'm sort of musing at the moment.
And
Right, can I perhaps just bring in John here, if I may? John, I remember sort of we talked here about trust, and I remember years ago when Facebook came out that people said, "Oh, we don't trust people to go on Facebook in their lunch hour or whatever." But we do trust them to go out and do an audit and come back with some papers on which we will sign a document that potentially puts the firm at risk. So, John, in your world, how does this trust and issue impact the way that people go about their roles and the way that they're led?
We do have a pretty high level of trust in our team, so we are very firmly in the hybrid model. That said, I feel that we are moving towards more in-person contact. So if I was tracking the number of hours in the office over the last 3 years, the trend is upwards. And I even see it in myself. It was 2, now it's 3. Some weeks I'm in 4 days, not necessarily for the whole day. So I think that's what's changed. Whereas before I'd get on the train, the 7:43 train or whatever, and be in. I might go in and out during the day and use my day differently. And I might be working in the evenings sometimes as well. So there's definitely more flexibility. But what we have found, I think, is that it's harder to build and instill culture in a firm where most people are remote most of the time. And the more we've got people together. So, for example, when we're covering the budget next Wednesday, my team will be in the office. I don't think we can do that effectively remotely. We tried it, it doesn't work. So I agree with Rachel, that you need to be clever about how you do it. But I think the balance is tipping certainly away from more time at home towards more time in the office now.
Excellent. Rachel, we seem to have lost Matt. Hopefully he's we're talking. Here he is. Welcome back, Matt. So we were talking in the sort of the green room about one of the challenges being that the internet suddenly disappears, and you suddenly disappeared. But welcome back. That's good to have you again. What John was saying, that is trust is absolutely fundamental to that world. But perhaps you have a question for either John or Rachel, Matt, that you'd like to ask.
Absolutely, yeah. So I just suddenly just disappeared, didn't I? One of the on the same theme of people, because they're sort of vitally important to all of us in our professions. One of the startling things come out of the survey is activity levels are anticipated to be up, but in comparison, the headcount isn't expected to increase going forward. So, did the panel think that we've got a problem with not enough capacity in the market, or are firms looking to work people harder?
I'm gonna jump in. I think what I'm certainly doing at the moment is trying to work people smarter. And in a firm the size of mine, we've got a staff team of about 40. I really want retention, and I want people to grow, and I want the firm to do well. But often you are stuck where there isn't any room for promotion. There's your roles are quite defined, and what I want to do now is try and expand certain roles, not because I'm trying to squeeze the maximum out of individuals, but actually more positively because I want people to have a bit of flex in what they're doing and have room for growth and to stay with the firm. And if I'm constantly bringing in somebody new to do that new thing, then I'm not growing the team that exists already. So currently, I'm not looking at this as a sort of negative and as a classic capitalist chief trying to squeeze people. Actually, I see this as quite a positive thing, trying to get people to work smart. Well, encouraging smarter working, more interesting working, building on what we've got. We've got a great team, headcount sort of works for the size we are. Yes, we want to grow, but that doesn't necessarily mean I put more bums on seats in the practice room.
That's right. And growth breeds opportunities for people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How about you, John? Are you sort of also looking at helping your team work smarter? And if so, how would you do that?
Yes, I would say that some of that working smarter is through as yet unidentified productivity gains from technologies that we don't quite know how to harness yet. So I think like there's a bit of optimism. I think if you've got a lot of those respondents in a room and asked them, there's probably quite a lot of optimism in a bit of optimism bias in their answers there, because I think we there are productivity gains we can get. I just don't quite know where we're going to get them from. The other point, I guess, is that we are looking. It's related, but we're looking at the balance of the kinds of people that we're employing as well. So I think in the kind of consultancy that we do now, there is more of a bias towards more senior professionals with more experience, because the work that's done at the more junior end of the firm, rightly or wrongly, is being more seen as a commodity than ever. And that's a problem, because that commodity work has been an important part of what we've done historically. But I just sense that our ability to have any pricing power in that segment is reducing, and it's either being in-housed or taken somewhere else or automated, or a mixture of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up that point, John, we're seeing that as well, because we are using AI, we are using digital transformation techniques right now in the work that we do, and what it's doing is it's brilliant. It's freeing up time, but it's freeing up time of the most junior people.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge for us now is to upskill them sooner, so that
100%.
they're doing that sort of more exciting, more valuable work sooner in their careers. We think it's achievable, but it's certainly one of our challenges. I mean, I'm conscious of time. I just want to move the question slightly more onto the more political questions, if I may. You mentioned at the start about the role of regulators in growth. How do you see that a potential conflict there between the role of a regulator on quality versus getting regulators to encourage growth?
Yes. Okay. So there is an argument about whether those two are mutually exclusive. Okay. So it is possible to have high regulatory standards and high growth. I mean, I've done a lot of work, and I know Rachel will know about legal services regulation, which is a whole minefield of its own. But in financial services regulation, in all sorts of regulation, the rule book just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you stand back and look at it, you ask the question, has this actually meaningfully improved growth or outcomes for customers or prices? All it does is it increases the costs of compliance without any. So because the system doesn't evolve strategically, it just evolves over time with layer over layer over layer, and then at some point somebody will say we need a whole root and branch reform, but then the process sort of starts over and over again. So I am sympathetic to this call from politicians to say to regulators, you need to think about growth and competitiveness from the ground up, as an important part of your thinking. So there's one example recently, which was the FCA had a name and shame proposal out. So if you're under investigation by the FCA for certain things, that you would be named in public, and the pushback from the sector was enormous. And I think the growth mandate from the growth secondary mandate has helped create this sort of pushback and the ability for the FCA to go back and actually, we're going to review this. So maybe it will work. I don't know, Rachel, what you think about legal services.
Well, I work in a very curious world of the bar. So in my small, odd section, and I don't mean it's not being disparaging, but it's just we are regulated by the Bar Standards Board, and the Bar Standards Board is doing a lot of, quite rightly, interrogation of how we work. Lots of currently there's a consultation out about equality and inclusion and about how we work most effectively in this area. For us, it's an oddity because barristers are sole practitioners, they're self-employed effectively, and there's this tension and dichotomy between how you can regulate X number of thousands individual barristers who do, some of whom come together in an organisation like mine, which is known as Barristers' Chambers, but it's actually a sort of law firm of sorts, So is the firm to be regulated or the individual barristers to be regulated? And there's a bit of tension there. But my issue on growth is that it's actually up to each individual how much work they want to be doing, how much they want to be charging, whether or not they want to be increasing year on year. The issue at this type of area of the law is that I don't really have a dial to turn necessarily, because it's up to the individuals themselves how they want to be growing or not their individual practices. So that's just the sort of the oddity of the place that I work.
Well, I don't think,
Ed,
Rachel,
I think there is a
sorry.
lot of growth across the bar. So, it's organically happening, but
Yeah, I
sorry.
mean, I'm not sure that actually, Rachel, from my point of view, you're that different. I remember talking to Mike Strong, who was the former chairman of the managing partners forum when he was at CBRE. And he said, yeah, he did 40 deals in the space of 5 years, big transactions. But at the end of the day, if he couldn't get the local manager in Frankfurt to endorse a particular initiative, nothing changed. So I do think that, yes, the sort of people in small groups are actually hugely important. Now, is that the same in financial services and in law? I'm not sure, but maybe Matt, you have some thoughts in terms of the accountancy world.
Well, yeah, you need people to work in teams. Okay, you empower teams to drive through change and make decisions. We've grown over the years, and we've got a couple of transactions this month, and we were about 1,500 people. And it's impossible to manage those people as individuals, but you empower teams to manage it. And so when we are doing transactions, it's about bringing them on the journey to integrate them and empower things to make happen. And it's my role just to be sort of over the top of that to make sure things are happening. So, for us, growth is important. We can see it organically. We can see opportunities there for hiring great people, great talent in, but through acquisitions as well. And I guess it's a double-edged sword for us, really, because we're quite heavily regulated, very heavily regulated, which is good. It drives quality, which is fantastic. There's a greater understanding out there in our clients about, particularly in the audit side of things, what quality means, and actually they do search for good firms. But a question really for John. Have you been involved much in the evolution of ARGA? I think the government have put that back on the political agenda again, and that's going to bring increased regulation away from, in addition to professional services, but also focusing on company boards as well. They're going to be a bit more in the spotlight.
Yeah, so ARGA is an interesting one, because I've followed this really since it grew out of the Carillion scandal and the failure of audits, and then the lack of accountability on boards. I think the thing with ARGA is it's just taken such a long time. Okay, so it's probably the right thing. It is the right thing to give FRC statutory teeth. I think it needs to happen. But this process has been going on for years, and we are still waiting for a draft bill to come forward to make this happen. So you've kind of got the FRC, which is still stuck. It's neither one nor the other. But what I find interesting is you've seen this general push away from self-regulation towards statutory regulation, and you've seen that with the formalization of legal services regulation. That
John, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're just unfortunately coming up to time. So I'd like to switch back to the gallery mode for everybody, and thank you I hope you had a chance to answer that question, John. I thought it was as though we're all waiting for Godot, and that's a great play, by the way, on at Theatre Royal at the moment. Rachel, what was, before you dash for your taxi, what was the one thing that you felt was really helpful or insightful or interesting from today's show?
The thing that I was reminded of is when John opened up about Keir Starmer's new leadership of the country, and how comms had perhaps let him down to start with. There was a bit of a change in his chief of staff, and that the communications improved. And it just reminds me that it's communication when you're running a firm.
Matt, over to you. What's your takeaway for today?
For me, we didn't touch on it, but the budget, I think it's right that the government are taking a more considered approach to the budget. However, the uncertainty is causing significant problems, and the communication is not great. So back to Rachel's thing, it's all about communication.
And John, you're in the comms world, arguably, political consultancy.
Yeah, this is what you need to do is
what's your
pay for our
takeaway?
services. That's the message I take from this. There's something quite interesting though. It was actually in the survey data about people being primed for growth and thinking that they're all better than their competitors. So I think if you're in consultancy, you need to think you're better than your competitors. But what's interesting is because the mood music is still quite gloomy. You know, Matt, you're right. There's lots of uncertainty. Nobody really knows what's going to be in the budget. Consumers are feeling a bit cool at the moment, and yet firms in this sector still think that they're primed for growth. I find that quite an interesting twist.
Well, I always think my thought again is that if your focus is on operational efficiency, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to grow.
Yeah,
it can often mean the opposite.
Might give you capacity, but it doesn't give you the growth. Yeah.
Exactly. So onwards and upwards. Rachel, have a lovely weekend. Thank you for joining us. John, thank you as always. Look forward to seeing you next month, and hopefully we'll then know the results of the US election and try and start thinking what the budget means, or the other way around. And Matt, thank you for joining us, my co-host today, and for telling us a little about your firm, but also asking some great questions. So thank you all. And to the show, we're back at the end of the next month. And then we take a break in December, and back in January, we will have episode number 100 of Retuning Your Show. Amazing.
Fantastic.
Bye for now, everybody.
See ya.
Bye. Thanks.